Hey, what's going on? Welcome to the 80-20 rule of podcast marketing. A little bit of a follow-up from the previous episode, which was the 80-20 rule of podcast production. This is the Podcast Accelerator with me, Mark Asquith. It's a thrice-weekly show that brings you podcast education, industry insights, and straight-talking reactions to podcasting news. I am that British podcast guy and CEO and co-founder here at Rebel Base Media, the podcast tech company that creates the Podcast Success Academy, podcast websites, Productivity, Rebel Base Studios, and Captivate.fm, the world's only growth-oriented podcast host, where you can host and start multiple shows for one simple price and transfer an existing show in completely for free. So go ahead and start your 7-day free trial at Captivate.fm. Now, what about when your podcast downloads aren't trending upwards? What about when they're not going in the right direction? If you use a podcast host such as Captivate, we give you tools to track how you're trending. You're not just looking at the number, you're looking at the percentage increase or decrease month on month, week on week, day by day. What if that is not trending in the right direction? Well, the most common decision that you're going to make as a podcaster at that point is to actually introduce more and more content. And that is what is causing your podcast growth to stagnate. So I'm going to dig into that in just one moment, but I want to give a 2-second shout out to AWeber, the wonderful team who power my email marketing, my engagement with my listeners. Now, without them, I wouldn't generate revenue from my audience. I wouldn't generate traffic. I wouldn't generate actual revenue through my software companies. And I truly believe that with 20 years in the industry, they are the best at what they do. So if you want to create a genuine connection with your listeners, please start to build your email list. And you can do that for free for 90 days at markasquith.com/AWeber. So like I said, what do you do when your podcast downloads aren't trending upwards, when they're not going in the right direction? Maybe they're going in the wrong direction. Maybe they're not staying neutral. Maybe they're actually flipping downwards and they're actually, the growth of your show is slowing down. Well, like I said, the most common thing that podcasters tend to do is that they will introduce more and more content. And I believe it's that is holding you back. Now, let me explain. If you release a weekly show, what will tend to happen is that you will reach a certain level of downloads, and then it becomes about marketing. Then it becomes about introducing new listeners to your podcast. But what we tend to focus on as podcasters is oftentimes the wrong number, and that number is the number of downloads that we get overall per month across our entire show. Why do we focus on that? Because it's the biggest, sexiest number. It's the biggest, sexiest number. If I get 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 downloads a month, of course, that's the vanity metric, because I can then say to people, I get 20,000 downloads a month. You see all the time with podcasters, I get 30 million downloads over the lifetime of my show. Who cares? I don't care, all right? What I care about is the quality of your audience. And to measure that quality of the audience, what you've got to understand is that that's about engagement, it's about interaction, it's about very clearly stating what the downloads per episode over a very short period of time post-release is. So 28 days after release of any given episode, what is that number? That's the number that I'm more interested in, okay? And that's the number that sponsors and brands and people in the industry are much more interested in. So what tends to happen is that when we think to ourselves, right, we are going to produce more content. We do that because that will help us to increase that vanity metric. It helps us to increase our quote-unquote reach. But that's actually rubbish. Reach is not the biggest number. It's not all these numbers added up, the social followings and the kind of the likes, the engagement, the downloads, the email. That's not reach, genuinely, when you throw in podcast numbers across a month. Because it's kind of bastardized a little bit insofar as if I release one episode per week and then I release a second episode per week, of course, that is going to bump my episode numbers up. My download numbers up across each month. Because the 400 people, the 500 people, the 1,000 people, the 10,000 people that listen on a Monday will probably tune in on a Thursday as well to that same episode. But they're not different people. They're not 1,000 or 10,000 extra people. They're the same people listening to another episode. So it's really easy to think to yourself, this is fantastic, I've increased my downloads, when you haven't. You've increased your monthly aggregate downloads. But what you've not done is necessarily increase the number of downloads that you receive episode on episode. And that is the thing that sponsors want to see. Because what will happen is ultimately, you might see a little bit more engagement because you're getting kind of 2 bites at the cherry. You're giving people 2 times per week or 3 times per week to take action based on what they say, on what you say, and what they hear. But ultimately, that's going to be disproportionately low. The engagement, the interaction, the calls to action being fulfilled will be disproportionately low to the quote-unquote download increase that you see month on month. The reason for that is that it's the same people. If they're not going to take action on a Tuesday, they probably ain't taking action on a Thursday. All right? It's much, much better, and this is where the 80-20 rule of podcast marketing comes in. It's much better to spend that time, that 80% of your week, marketing your one episode as opposed to creating another episode just to get a boost in downloads. Okay? It's a little bit nuts to increase your content. Now, look, I get it. I put 3 pieces of content out every week just on this show. But it's short form content. That's my intent with that. I ain't increasing this to an extra 1 per week regularly. Sure, I might do a bonus one, but that's when the audience dictates it, when the industry dictates it. Like when I did a session on when iTunes was killed and Apple Podcast was announced. It was timely, relevant, and my promise is to give you news. But I wouldn't just increase it every single week just to up my downloads every week. Instead, I would market my show more. That is what I believe the 80-20 rule. And again, just like the last episode, we talked about it on the previous episode, the 80-20 rule of podcast production, where I believe 80% of the time in producing an episode should go into creating amazing content, and 20% of time should go into making sure it's recorded and produced just good enough to be good. This is the same. 20% of your entire output should be content. 80% of your entire output should be marketing that content. All right? If you don't believe me, go and take a look at the biggest podcasters. Unless it's a daily news show or a weekly news show or a bi-weekly news show, they ain't releasing that frequently. Serial is serialized. All right? Most things from Wondery are serialized. Audio dramas tend to be serialized, or they just do 1 a week. Look at the biggest podcasters in your niche. They're very, very infrequent. Think of Dan Carlin. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this over on the next episode. Just going to dig into this a little bit more. Look at Dan Carlin. He releases whenever he releases. He's got no set schedule. But his quality and the depth of the content is outstanding. And then he markets that content. And really markets that content for a long, long time. Okay? So if you're producing too much content, people don't know what to do. People don't know where to look. They don't know how to stay up to date. All right? And I'm going to dig into that a little bit further on the next episode. But the 80-20 rule of podcast marketing, in my opinion, is you should be spending 80% of your time focusing on the output of marketing your podcast and 20% of your time focusing on the output of podcast creation. And again, the same as Monday's episode. I'm sure that every other podcaster under the sun will find something that they disagree with that. But that's fine. We've all got our different ways of doing things. This works for me. It might work for you, might not work for you, but that is my view on podcast marketing. 80% of your time should be focused purely on marketing. All right? Please, just take heed of it. If you have stagnated in terms of podcast growth, consider that. Rather than spending 2 hours a week producing a new show, put that 2 hours a week extra into marketing. Okay? Market the last episode that you produced. Please. Give it a whirl. Let me know how you get along. You got my email address, mark@rebelbasemedia.io. And as always, cheers for joining me as ever on the Podcast Accelerator. Remember to tell your podcasting friends that the show is available to listen to for free in any app that supports podcasts. And look, if you got 5 minutes, I want to help you out with your podcast. We put a nice little, just a really little kind of quiz and a little set of options together for you to help you to understand which one of the big 4 podcasting challenges is holding you back. We defined that there are only 4. We did a pile of research into podcasting in our independent podcaster survey 2019. Found out that actually podcasters only struggle to grow their show for one of 4 reasons. Which one is affecting you? Go and check that out at rebelbasemedia.io/grow. Until the next episode, I appreciate you. Much, much love. And never forget, the more you expect from yourself, the more you will excel.